created government. And the fact that we have let it go into the possession of others is heartbreaking for those of us who understand.
Some will say now that I am calling America a Christian nation. And so I am. And some will say that I am advocating Christian nationalism. And so I do.
Christianity will have power without having to form, because if I'm there, you're going to have plenty of power.
We need to be the party of nationalism, and I'm a Christian, and I say it proudly. We should be Christian nationalists.
I love you, Christians. I'm not Christian. I love you. Get out. You got to get out and vote.
I'm Antwann Michael, and this is The Breakdown. The present predicament of the United States is more than just about enshrining the executive branch of the government with all of these powers, all of these rights, the ability to override the judiciary so that Donald Trump can sign whatever executive order and do whatever he wants, right? And there are various points of critique to this, various points of analysis, and those points of critiques and analyses are correct, right? But what I want us to do is zoom out and understand the larger phenomenon that is taking place, that those who were once upon a time on the extreme right of things in terms of their ideologies, being both conservative and Christian, are now the center. They are now the base. It is Trump who is bringing their will into being, that he is signing off on their policies and what they need to have done so that they are recognized in society in a specific and particular type kind of sort of way. And how was this accomplished? Vis-a-vis the Heritage Foundation. And what we have to understand is that both over space and time, the Heritage Foundation has been led by white men who are extremely conservative and who are Christian and who understand themselves, their rights, their privileges, what they're entitled to, what they should be able to do, what they should not be held accountable for, vis-a-vis their race, their religion, their gender, and their faith. And that particular intersection for them, when those intersections collide at that particular place, according to them, God gave them dominion over the earth vis-a-vis those identities. And by way of that, they wrote out those policies that pulled back reproductive rights, that's pulling back Medicaid, that's pulling back Medicare. And this mandate for leadership, i.e. Project 2025, is not something new. As we know, the mandate for leadership is something that really takes prominence with the Heritage Foundation when Ronald Reagan assumes office, and they are working through Ronald Reagan to get these things done. Because what happens in the 1970s is the national welfare rights movement. And you have folks like Johnny Tillman who are saying, hold up, wait a minute. We deserve WIC, right? We deserve access to SNAP. We need affordable housing because we are doing all of this work for the nation. But what is the nation doing for us? If you have not read Welfare is a Woman's Right, please make sure you read Welfare is a Woman's Right by Johnny Tillman. And ever since those movements took place, right? And let's be clear while I'm here, it is the national welfare rights movement and the work of people like Johnny Tillman who gives Dr. Martin Luther King his economic agenda. That moment when he says that America has written us a check and we're coming to get our check and different things of that sort, that comes out of the national welfare rights movement. And so out of that particular type of context, you get the Heritage Foundation that pushes back vis-a-vis the lives of white Christian men, and they are saying, nope, you are taking away from us. And so now what we need to do in order to understand ourselves and in order to stand tall, we need to control your bodies. We need to make sure that we are pulling away from you SNAP benefits, that we are pulling away from you WIC benefits, that we are pushing out of the country those who do not look like us. And those particular policies, those particular beliefs, those particular ideologies have been mapped into the mandate for leadership ever since the late 1970s and early 1980s and comes through to 2025, such that by the time we get to Donald Trump, they have built up the base in such a way to where it looked fringe, but they always had those who were who were at the center, who were willing to get done what they need to get done. And now they have an executive who's not willing to think critically and willing to sign off on anything, and not realizing that he is a puppet who is bringing these particular ideologies into being that somewhat benefit him, but overwhelmingly benefit white men who do not know who they are unless they are oppressing others. That is the moment that we are in. And it is the mistake of ego. It is a mistake of narcissism that would have the current executive to think that, oh, all of this power is about me. No, it is not. It is about the radical reconstruction of the United States. It is about the capitulation of the United States from moving from a democratic polity to a white Christian nationalist polity that does a certain sort of thing, such that the substructures of the nation itself have been removed and has now been replaced with these type of ideologies, to where everyone in society who does not reflect the privileged demographic are now made subject to and are subjugated by this particular brand of Christian nationalism that is now being touted, that is now centered in our policies, despite the fact that Donald Trump has said, hey, Christians are going to have all this power, but I'm not a Christian. And they're saying that's fine with us because you are still doing what we want you to do. And we have to understand what we are up against. And it is interesting that even those who are non-white, non-male, are saying, hey, well, we're Christians, so we're going to roll with them. But it is impossible that the oppressed is praying to the same God as the oppressor, and that God is answering the prayers of both and blessing both. Those two things cannot exist within the same context. We are talking about a brand and a rendering of Christian nationalism that brings on the Mexican-American War, a brand of Christian nationalism that gets us to the Trail of Tears, a brand of Christian nationalism that rolls back Roe versus Wade, a brand of Christian nationalism that would go to lynchings and watch men and women swing from trees, a brand of Christian nationalism that bought on slavery. This is what we are dealing with. So when they say make America great again, this is exactly what they are talking about. This is exactly what they are pointing to. And they believe that God anointed, appointed, and directed them for this hour and this time, and that somehow it is amazing grace over their lives. And so now what the concern becomes about, and this is where the great replacement theory ultimately comes in, they see it is as their divine will that, hey, we got to get all these non-white people out of the nation because they are taking over the call of God on our lives to have dominion over this particular nation. And this is what we must be aware of. That yes, critiques and analysis can be said about Donald Trump, but ultimately what is taking place is the radical capitulation of the foundations of the nation to be toward Christian nationalism in service of white men who don't know who they are without oppressing others. That's what we call insecurity, right? Because if you can only render yourself by way of marginalizing others, then that's a conversation that needs to be had with the self. But that is what is currently taking place. And we must be aware of this. And I'm not saying that, the democratic pillars that existed in the United States, were perfect before. But of course, that's what protest and opposition was for, etc. But now protest and opposition are beginning to be shut down because these men see the nation state as being in service to themselves. So when we talk about Christian nationalism, there are various understandings of it. But please understand that this moment is just as much about bringing an autocracy in as just as much as it is about bringing a theocracy in. That we are talking about an autocratic theocracy being ushered in this moment. And that is what they mean by make America great again.